Well, good morning, everyone. Um, Welcome, everyone, to this event, this important event on possible futures for clean energy technologies, manufacturing and trade, with a particular focus on emerging markets and developing economies. First of all, I would just like to thank, on behalf of the International Energy Agency, the European Investment Bank and the Benelux Pavilion for hosting us today on this event, and of course to all the distinguished guests and panelists we have today for the discussion. My name is Araceli Fernandez. I'm heading the Technology and Innovation unit within the Technology Office at the International Energy Agency. And just to give you a little bit of context on how the event will be structured today. We'll first have opening remarks from the Madam Minister Tim van der Straeten, Minister for Energy from Belgium. Warm welcome. I'll then briefly bring you through some of the key insights from the recent analysis on energy technology perspectives 2024 from the IEA, which is focusing very much on this particular topic. And we'll have then a moderated panel discussion moderated by Ms. Raikin McCormick, which is the Director General for Natural Resources Canada. And the panel will be composed of a group of distinguished guests from governments, industry, and relevant international institutions as well. So with that, and not to delay schedule of anyone, let me give the floor to Ms. van der Straeten for her opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning to all of you, and it's a pleasure to welcome me in the Benelux and the EIB pavilion again for yet another interesting and energizing side event. And today is all about the future of technology and collaboration, and also the role we have, specifically the role we have as a global community, a role that we have to play in the transition to a cleaner and also a more sustainable world. Let me first thank you, the IEA, for this timely analysis. The topics of manufacturing and trade in clean tech supply chains have become daily news headlines and also daily worries for energy ministers like me. It is clear that creating an incentivizing policy framework in these areas will be crucial for the clean energy transition to continue gathering pace. And the IEA's ETP provides a great analytical foundation for examining this topic and also to base policies on. A clear example of data-driven policy. We hold this very high. This is also a very particularly crucial moment as geopolitical stability and inflation are a cause for concern for leaders across the globe, at a time when we need so desperately to double down on our climate efforts. Energy and the disruption of clean energy technology supply chains have been identified as key challenges. International collaboration, including with emerging markets and developing economies, could well be an important part of overcoming these challenges and create mutual benefits. The challenges ahead of us, without any doubt, they are significant. Climate change, inequality, environmental pollution, they impact countries across the world. But we also have the power to create change, and that begins with collaboration. Clean energy technologies should not only be a means of growth and progress, it's also the key to a sustainable, inclusive future, a future in which emerging and developing economies can move forward the transition through collaboration while they leave no one behind. And I would like to highlight an example of Belgium and Namibia, which can serve as an example of close collaboration. At COP26 in Glasgow, so 3 COPs ago, Belgium and Namibia, we signed an MOU with a visionary goal. The subject of the MOU was to develop a large-scale renewable energy production site using solar and wind energy to produce green hydrogen. This project is known as the Namibian Clean Energy Project, and it exemplifies what is actually possible when two countries decide to work together. And specifically when ministers have the backing of local industries, both in Namibia and Belgium in this case. And so since the end of September 2023, the first construction activities have begun in Namibia, including a 10-hectare solar park with a hydrogen production facility. And this facility is equipped with a 5 megawatt proton exchange membrane electrolyzer and a 5 megawatt hour battery, which together produce hydrogen that can then be used at a public hydrogen refueling station. And this is only the first phase, but it's one full of hope and ambition. The second phase will involve a massive expansion with an electrolyzer capacity of 900 megawatts and an infrastructure for green ammonia production combined with export at the port. With an estimated total investment of 2.8 billion euros, Namibia is taking a major step towards a sustainable energy future. The point that I want to make here is that projects like this can indeed massively increase the market size for mass manufactured clean technologies like electrolyzers and can contribute to ongoing growth in others like wind and solar, for example. The hydrogen that will be produced in Namibia, and the ammonia more specifically, will also be used as a shipping fuel, a fuel to be used in the ships that are used by CMB Tech, which is one of the companies that is participating in the project. At the same time, this production facility in Namibia is creating jobs in Namibia, but it's also attracting solar and wind investments, solar renewable capacity to Namibia. Investments and capacities that Namibia absolutely needs to further electrify, and not only electrify, but more basically give Namibians access to clean energy, to electricity. So this project is a project about a win-win partnership. It is essential to me, and that's why I'm giving this example here today, that new trade relationships truly benefit not only or specifically the domestic market, and that they reap the benefits of employment and economic development stemming from these projects. Our project between Belgium and Namibia is not a one-way route, not a one-way project. It's not about having a huge investment in green hydrogen and then all this green hydrogen exported to Europe, but it's a win-win where we create job opportunities in Namibia and also access to clean energy in Namibia. And that's why we are in this project on equal footing, and that we have spent a lot of time to better understand each other's challenges and define the project in such a way as also to address each other's challenges. And so when we talk about trade relationships, and specifically also in clean energy technologies, these trade relationships must be more than just a purely economic transaction. They must contribute to the sustainable development of local economies and local communities. And so let us continually question whether our actions truly contribute to an inclusive and a just future that leaves no one behind. And I want to add another inspiring aspect of this collaboration, that is the focus on knowledge sharing. This goes just beyond sharing technology and creating economic opportunities for the both of us. It also includes the transfer of skills, the building of expertise, and the creation of opportunities, learning opportunities for local citizens. At the Clean Energy Green Hydrogen site, a hydrogen academy has already been established. It's a training center preparing Namibian talent for the green hydrogen economy. And this training center collaborates closely with European universities and companies so that Namibian students and professionals can develop into experts in the emerging hydrogen sector. We have also organized, both my esteemed colleague, His Excellency Tom Alwenne, and myself, a hydrogen capacity building mission with various Namibian delegations. We went to Namibia, afterwards they came to Belgium. And through this program, it was Namibian policymakers together with Belgian policymakers, but also entrepreneurs from both our sides, we combined and we teamed also up with European Union's experiences and strategies. We came together for building this hydrogen economy. And so the both of us around the table, we gained insight into legislative processes, into infrastructure, and the knowledge economy surrounding hydrogen. And these are all crucial elements for a successful transition. And these lessons learned have led to very specific plans for future collaboration. So to me, this Namibian clean energy project offers really an impressive example of how countries can work together to make a difference. And it also shows that a joint commitment to sustainable technologies is not only possible, but also essential for our shared future. It creates a world in which we strive for a balance between technology and sustainability, and in which we collectively work towards a cleaner planet by making people also a center of this project. So let us continue to collaborate, also to exchange on new developments and build this hopeful future together by investing together in technologies that benefit us all on equal footing. And let us, as a global community, also take responsibility to assist countries in the global south so they can pursue a cleaner, a fairer path than we have taken in the past. And so together we can create a world where innovation and sustainability go hand in hand, and where every nation, large or small, developed or developing, has an equal chance at a sustainable future. Let us make a difference here, and let us make this difference now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister, and I think that's a great example, to put it in very tangible terms, what it could mean to actually collaborate in a win-win way across countries to make the difference, as Minister very well put it. Let me now turn into the next part of the event. So just to set a little bit further the scene about this topic, to inform a little bit the audience and to inspire some thoughts for the discussion. So in this edition of Energy Technology Perspectives, we focus particularly on this topic of manufacturing and trade for the top 6 clean energy manufacturing technologies, clean energy technologies that are mass manufactured, starting for electric vehicles, but also batteries, solar PV, wind, electrolyzers and heat pumps. But we also looked at key materials relevant for those technologies, such as steel and aluminium. We ask ourselves what could be the implications of industrial strategies being in place or being discussed, as well as different trade measures and policies in terms of the possible futures of this manufacturing and trade for those particular commodities. And so let me just get started, if this works. Perfect. By setting a little bit the scene on what's the market size. And of course here there's a lot of numbers between billions and trillions, but the message should be very clear that manufacturing clean energy technologies is not anymore a niche market, it's not even a climate story. It is really today a sizable industry, a tremendous market opportunity. If we look back at almost 10 years ago, 2015, at that point in time, we had a market in which only 1% of the cars sold in the world were electric, compared to the around 20% that we see today globally. Solar PV capacity additions were just 10% of what we expect them to be globally this year. And at that time, these top 6 clean energy technologies that I've mentioned were accounting for a market of around $200 billion US dollars. Now, when we look at 2023, this number has grown dramatically towards $700 billion US dollars. And this is, in most cases, because we've seen an important growth. Sorry, thank you for helping. In these markets. And when we look at the regional distribution here, of course, China has an important role with around 60% of that market, and that's simply because 40% of the electric cars sold in China are electric. China added renewable capacity of more than 60% than the rest of the world in that year. But we are seeing as well progress in other regions as well, as industrial strategies have been put forward. But when we look into the outlook, if we just can do a next click, please. Apologies, can we have the next click, please? Thank you. If we just move forward and look at the outlook for this, we've been trying to understand what the current policy settings would mean in terms of the evolution of this market. And basically, on that context, by 2035, we see that this will grow to around $2 trillion US, which, to put it in context, is equivalent to the oil market that we've seen in recent years. Again, we expect China to remain with an important role, but other countries are really catching up and growing those markets on the basis of existing energy policies in place. Now, I might need your help to move the slide, sorry, because the clicker is not working. Thank you. Where there is an important market and there is a firm view in terms of that expected growth, there will be companies that will be willing to invest, and this is really what we see in terms of clean technology manufacturing. We've seen a surge on investments of around $235 billion US put into place for manufacturing these technologies, and this has a tremendous impact. What we've seen is monitoring where the different manufacturing facilities are around the world. We see that there are 700 facilities around the world to manufacture PV modules and other components related to that, particularly in China, Southeast Asia, but also United States and Europe. If we look at wind in the next click, what we will see, thank you, is that there's also an important investment here with around 500 manufacturing facilities around the world, particularly just noting here some considerable capacity in Latin America. And if we just go to the next click, we'll see that we have around 1,600 facilities to manufacture electric vehicles and battery cells and battery components around the world. Overall, we see that all these facilities, several thousands of facilities, span across 60 countries. But there are also some bitter realities when we look at the details here. If you see in the map, there's not even a handful of manufacturing facilities in the whole continent of Africa. So this really means that the African continent at the moment is not really reaping into these benefits of the new clean energy economy. And I'll come back to that in the presentation, of course, because it's one of the key themes we want to touch in the panel. So, of course, all these facilities are different. They have different utilization rates, different product quality. But when we look at the actual throughput of them, in the next click, we'll see how clean technology manufacturing is really highly regionally concentrated. We see that the manufacturing output in terms of value from all these facilities is hosting 70% of that is hosted in China today. So we have a dispersed picture when it comes to the demand for these technologies, but we have a concentrated picture when it comes to the supply of those technologies. This results in an obvious conclusion, which is that trade is really crucial, and this is why we looked into that in detail. In the next click, you'll see that we have really looked in a lot of detail to these trade routes, port by port, country by country, to understand those trends. And we see two main conclusions. The first one is that there's a major trade flow for clean technologies from east to west, from China and Southeast Asia towards Europe. And the second conclusion is that around 50% of this trade of clean technologies passes through the Strait of Malacca, which is a very busy shipping route today. Now, just to put that in context, that level of dependency on a single, let's say, regional strait or physical strait is quite significant, considering that around 20% of the fossil fuel trade today passes through the Strait of Hormuz. So again, important consideration when it comes to energy security, energy resilience. Now, if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to put a bit in context these numbers on trades. Today, clean technology trade accounts roughly around $200 billion US globally for those top 6 clean energy technologies that I've mentioned. That's small in the overall scheme of things when we look at total trade of international trade for goods. Today, fossil fuels represent around 10% of that, which is similar to the size of the global trade for food products. And we expect that, of course, to evolve moving forward. When we looked at the implications of industrial strategies, of different trade measures that have been growing, we were seeing in our analysis that despite this dynamism of all these trade measures being put forward, if we think about import duties, if we think about different tariffs and many more measures, despite that, if we go to the next click, we'll see that the expectation under current policy settings, both on industrial strategies and trade policies, is that the volume of trade would triple and would become around $600 billion by 2035, so in about 10 years time from now. This is equivalent to 50% more than the natural gas trade that happens globally today. So again, very important growth that it would be expected. On the other side of the coin, in the next click, you'll see that within this transition, already just on the basis of current policy settings, we expect a reduction in the trade of fossil fuels. Somehow modest when we look at it on the basis of current policy settings, but of course, all these trends, either the growth on clean technology trade or the decrease on fossil fuel trade, could be magnified depending on the pace of the transition. Now, moving to the next slide, just wanted to highlight that, of course, the role of individual countries in this future of trade would very much depend on the evolution of these industrial strategies and how effective they would be in keeping competitiveness of these different regions. On one hand, if we look at fossil fuel trade, we see that in countries like China, European Union, United States, of course, all those regions have important energy policies in place that are supporting the deployment of clean energy technologies. They also are major manufacturing hubs. When we look at the side of fossil fuels, we see China being the largest importer of fossil fuels, followed by Europe, and the US being an exporter of fossil fuels. When we take into account the different measures at play here for clean technology trade, the picture is more nuanced. If we do another click, we'll see that on one hand, we'll have China that today exports around $100 billion of clean technologies outside the world. And the outsized role that China has on clean technology manufacturing implies that under current policy settings, it could be really expanding significantly within the next click that value of clean technology exports to $340 billion. This is equivalent to the combined exports of oil from Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates today. Now, in the European Union, if we do another click, what we see is that the combined trade effect of fossil fuels and clean energy technologies, we expect that to remain in the future as a net importer of those commodities. But it's important to flag here that we expect at the same time a shift away from fossil fuels in those imports and towards clean technologies playing a greater share of that import. And that might be seen as a negative result from the perspective of industrial policy, but it's actually a positive aspect, that shift, when we think about, from the energy policy perspective, the resilience benefit that this would bring. Because just to put an example that could provide a bit of context on this, just one single container, large container, bringing solar PV module, to a particular country, to Europe in this case, could generate or provide the means to generate the electricity that would be equivalent to that could be generated from either 50 large LNG tankers or 100 large coal ships. So the difference is quite important in terms of the impact that these clean technology imports can bring to the system. And then just a quick word on the United States. Of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, put important incentives that make quite attractive clean technology manufacturing in the region. And there's, of course, preferential trade agreements that form an important basis for the US to keep trading on these commodities. Now we go to the next slide. Again, just wanted to emphasize that, of course, the evolution of the effectiveness of different industrial strategies and how they can make sure that competitiveness could remain in those regions would be crucial to really see how these different opportunities would play about in the different countries. And I just wanted to illustrate this with two examples, solar PV and batteries. Just, of course, as we've seen by now, China is the largest producer for solar PV modules and battery cells. But it's important to acknowledge that there's this growing dynamic of industrial strategies being shaped up in different countries. We've mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, we've mentioned the Net Zero Industry Act in Europe, India's product linked incentive scheme as well, but there's many more. There's Malaysia, new industrial master plan, there's Egypt's development plan for the automotive industry, there's the Made in Canada program, there's the new Made in Australia development program as well. So there's many of these industrial strategies really taking place, which means that despite China is expected to take to still have a prevalent role in the future, if we do another click, we'll see that other countries really would be catching up in that landscape. And of course, depending on the pace of the transition, depending on how these energy and industrial policies, trade policies will play about, this could be even magnified. If we do another click, we'll see how this could look at in a faster clean energy transition landscape. Now, I just wanted to now turn in the next slide back to the point about emerging markets and developing economies. What we see is that today, only 5% or even less than 5% of the value added on clean technology manufacturing around the world is based on regions like Latin America, like Africa, like Southeast Asia. If we look at the pipeline of announcements for expansions on clean technology manufacturing, that's actually a similar picture. Only 5% of that pipeline is based in those regions. This, of course, on the basis of that status of that landscape today, is not a promising prospect. And what we see as well is that in most cases, the role of these regions in clean technology supply chains is limited to the upstream steps that have lower value added, to provide some minerals, to provide some of the raw materials at the very start of the supply chains. We think that's not fair. We think that there's many benefits, social benefits, economic benefits from this clean energy transition that those regions will also reap. And so just wanted to illustrate this, the current role of these regions. If we just do that one click, just looking at copper, for example, here, 50% of the exports for copper, which is a critical material for electrification of the system, which is essential for the clean energy transition, come from Latin America. If we think about bauxite, 50% of the exports just come from a country in West Africa, which is Guinea. And just exporting this bauxite with very little value add, very little processing to other countries, where this value addition will take place when this bauxite is transformed into aluminium and different aluminium products. So again, there's very important opportunities that are to reap here. We wanted really to do an important analysis on this in the report, and we've looked at more than 60 indicators to understand what are the enabling conditions at the moment in these regions for investments on clean technology manufacturing and materials production. And in the areas of business environment, in the areas of the status of infrastructure for energy and transport, but also to understand what are the resource availability and what is the size of the domestic market. And again, we did this analysis to understand the current state of play, the strengths of each of these countries. We did this at a country-by-country level, but also what are the weaknesses and what are the barriers that need to be overcome. And then we undertook a bespoke analysis to understand these high potential opportunities for these regions. So let me just illustrate a couple of examples before wrapping up. If we go to the next slide, just starting by Latin America. This is a region where there's important renewable energy resources, there's important mineral deposits as well. We've seen as well, beyond these important assets when it comes to skilled workforce, which is important particularly for wind manufacturing and battery cell manufacturing. And what we saw is that, for example, Brazil is already a manufacturer of wind technology, and we think that in the medium term can have really potential to grow further. We also see that thanks to these mineral deposits that are in the region, there's prospects and opportunities for battery cell production. And just to mention as well, the fertilizer industry. At the moment, there's high demand in the region. The region is importing those fertilizers. We really think that can tap into these renewable energy resources to produce enough fertilizers to meet the demand in the region and even to become an exporter of ammonia to other regions in the world. Benefit again from these renewable energy sources. If we now book to the next slide and look at Africa. We think that there's important opportunities, particularly in North Africa, when it comes to electric vehicle manufacturing, building on the existing capacity for car manufacturing and investments that are underway in Morocco, for example. But also, there's important opportunities when it comes to energy-intensive industries. There's countries in the continent with iron ore deposits. At the moment, they are mostly exported. This could become iron products, iron production, using renewable energy sources and hydrogen that could be produced from those. And again, keeping more value added in the region, using that iron for domestic markets, but also for exports. And then if we just go to Southeast Asia, I mean, as we've seen in the next slide, sorry, in some of the previous slides, we've seen already Southeast Asia is a region that already manufactures clean energy technologies. We see that the region has the potential to be one of the least cost production regions for polysilicon and wafers, which are critical for PV modules production. And so we really think that with kind of soft policies and very targeted policies that can boost product quality, there could be really an important uptake of PV production, for example, in the region. But also, the region has the potential to produce more than the around 40,000 electric cars that is being produced today. So again, these are just some of the examples that we've identified. There are many more in the report, and very happy to discuss in the panel, how we can best reap these opportunities in a win-win situation, as Minister mentioned at the very beginning. I just wanted to leave it here, just go to the next slide, just by highlighting again how important it is, this trend that we are seeing with an increasingly, the goals of energy, industry, and trade policy, those goals being increasingly interwoven. This is a difficult terrain to navigate. We hope that this analysis can really help these decision makers, policy makers on that effort. There's not going to be one solution here for everything, of course, but we really think that some best practices around industrial strategies could really have to take into account, keep monitoring these industrial strategies, how it develops, be amenable to course corrections, and also making sure that in that process there's a continuous, incentives towards cultivating competitiveness, cultivating innovation, and making sure that trade policies are designed, are crafted very carefully to make sure that they are compatible with those goals. I'll leave it here in terms of the presentation, and then I'll just like to give the floor to our excellent moderator today, which is Rachel McCormick, again, Director General for Natural Resources Canada. She's going to be moderating the panel moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that great introduction, Araceli, and congratulations to the IEA for this first of its kind analysis. I've actually seen this presentation a few times, and I'm always impressed. Like some of those stats, especially that one about how clean tech is going to be equivalent to fossil fuel exports, that's like extraordinary, and I think it's really important for us to be watching some of this. So I'm excited about the distinguished panel of experts that we have. I'm excited about the experts we have today. So first, let me welcome up Mariana Espesi. She is Special Advisor to the Minister of Mines and Energy in Brazil and brings really valuable insights from one of the world's leading emerging markets in clean energy. And she is, and I congratulate her on a successful G20 Energy Transition Working Group ministerial in Foz. Luz Maria de la Mara, Director of Trade and Commodities at UNCTAD, who can shed light on the complexities of international trade and its role in fostering a resilient and inclusive clean energy transition. Rebecca Williams, who's the Deputy CEO of the Global Wind Energy Council, representing the cutting edge of renewable energy deployment and industry perspectives on overcoming trade and supply chain challenges. And of course, Araceli, please, Head of the Technology and Innovation Unit at the IEA, who just shared some of the results of the really important work and that sets the framework for our discussion today. So today we're going to talk about, the delicate balance governments must strike between maintaining efficient markets and ensuring cost-effective clean energy transitions. We'll delve into the tough decisions policymakers face, such as how to support industries, foster international collaboration, prioritize innovation, all while building secure supply chains for critical technologies like solar, wind, batteries, and beyond. I think when you saw some of those things about 2035, like that's only 10 years away. So obviously the decisions we're making today are really going to be important for achieving some of our goals. I look forward to a really dynamic conversation that not only highlights some of these challenges and opportunities, but also thinks about some of the actionable strategies for getting us where we need to go, including the opportunities for emerging economies. So let's get started. First, Mariana, I'm going to turn to you. In your experience working with the Minister of Mines and Energy, what are the greatest barriers you see on the ground to Brazil playing a more active role in clean energy technology manufacturing? And then on the other hand, where do you feel your country is already well positioned?
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thanks to IEA for this invitation. We are really happy to contribute to this debate. As you might know, Brazil is a developing country, an emerging market, and we have been through the new government, the government of President Lula, reestablishing a new industry policy into our country. So during the past, 4 years, we didn't have an industrial development well established in Brazil. So it has pushed us outside of this rush. Right now, we are running against time, just to guarantee that we can, of course, take the benefits of these energy transition and the technologies that are going to be required for this process. And right now, our country has a new industrial policy that is already in place, and we are designing under the one of its missions a specific a topic that is related specifically to how Brazil can contribute to developing a new market for these technologies. So we have many mineral reserves. We can provide the world with some important supplies. And we have a very nice experience in our country when we were at the past decade, when we have decided to bring to our electricity mix new technologies such as wind power, for example. By that time, we have decided to, we did some analysis, and we have concluded by that time that, well, Brazil is capable of producing 80% of the whole wind energy value chain inside our country. So let's do that. Let's go for it. So we have established a very well designed partnership with the National Development Bank of Brazil, where we could attract investors and those part of the industry. So those blue dots that you were seeing in the screen for the Brazilian territory is reflects these efforts that were made during the past decade when we moved into this decision. And we see that Brazil has a lot of difficulties by some of the, as we didn't have so far, we didn't advance in these industrial policies in our country, we have missed some important opportunities. For example, how can we increase competitiveness into a very new markets are coming up, and how can we guarantee that all the things that we are doing are going to attract the right investors? We have, as you might know, Brazil has a very high share of renewables in our electricity mix. And if we are taking into consideration only the national interconnected system, the national grid, we are talking about 93%. So it's quite a lot. We are already, we can provide the world the green premium that is being so much of attention right now for reducing different scopes of emission for some technologies. And we are aiming at attracting this new business to our country by also setting the scene and preparing all the regulations that are needed so that investors can feel comfortable about that. We have the industry, the private sector from the industry sector well mobilized right now so that we can advance in this sense. We are enhancing and reviewing many policies that we have and also additional regulations so that we can reduce the Brazil's costs, as we say, so that we can attract these investments and also guarantee that some part of this production can also be utilized by the domestic market, not only to provide to the world, but also to guarantee that Brazil can also consume these products and also be effective on reducing the emissions as well.
That's amazing, and a lot of progress in a short amount of time, building on opportunities and seeing the potential there. In response to that, Archeli, would you be able to tell us a little bit more in the analysis that drove ETP 24? As you designed it, how did you differentiate between opportunities as you explored countries and regions?
Thank you very much. We have to share here some. Yeah, no, thanks for that. To be honest, I mean, it's been quite a major undertaking from the team. There's a very big team behind of enthusiastic modelers and researchers really looking at gathering all this information, and it's been quite a challenge, all the data. First of all, we wanted to understand, the current landscape when it comes more to the actual trade and manufacturing capacity, but also announcements, as I've mentioned. But I mean, in particular for emerging markets and developing economies, we needed to go one step further, which is to understand, how this type of industrial activities could be developed. And so for this, we started to map, first of all, to understand what is driving this type of investments, why certain regions are attracting more investments than others, and that ranges, through a wide spectrum of different elements here. We run industrial surveys with technology developers, technology manufacturers, really to understand, also technology users, to understand what is driving those decisions and how the relative importance of these different factors change depending on what actually is the commodity that that manufacturing facility is expected to produce. And this helps us then to really to process this mapping of more than 60 indicators on a country-by-country level on these different areas of business environment and infrastructure, resource availability, domestic size. Some of them are kind of cross-cutting or kind of related to the specific country. Others are more dependent on what particular commodity we'll be looking at in that case. But to understand what was the relative importance of these different metrics for a final investment decision in a manufacturing plant. So we use the results from those surveys and consultation with experts really to fine-tune that kind of that process. And then of course that was a bit the starting point to understand, okay, where we are, what we are missing, and then really to understand in a context where a clean energy transition could move faster and there will be a greater global demand for these technologies globally. So how these regions could really reap into that greater global market. And this is where we developed this high potential case where really we're trying to see what would be the best opportunities in a way, the most interesting opportunities in each of these countries. Again, as examples to illustrate this case, of course we look at it at the national level, then when one goes to the regional and local level there could be others. But yeah, it was a quite interesting process, and we think it's a starting point that hopefully will be useful for governments to pick up, and we'll be very happy to take that forward and start discussing more specific partnerships and projects moving forward.
As a personal note, I would say that just the fact that you're developing these databases and these scenarios is really, really useful in terms of that concrete opportunity, because in many ways we're doing sort of international industrial policy, right, as we think about supply chains and seeing how it's all connected. And do you consider access to skilled workforce as you're doing these things, and how is that a constraint? I know the employment report just came out very recently, an energy employment report, and the vast number of jobs that are coming from the clean energy sector is quite phenomenal. So how did you consider that?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I think it's a very important point because developing skills is not something that can happen overnight. And so anticipation and planning is very important here, as when we talk about this for infrastructure, for example. We did look at that. We did look at the status and the landscape of skills, first by mapping what particular skills will be required to manufacture in different components, different technologies. And then we faced quite a big gap and challenge when it comes to data availability, particularly in these regions. But I could say that data around skills and jobs is not something fully available across the board in any case. But this was a particular challenge, and so we had to kind of look at creative solutions here. So we also look at understanding what were synergetic industrial activities that could have, some similar skills that could be a basis to build upon. So we also looked at, what could be the status and the capacity, the relative weight of these industries in those regions, in those countries, to again have a bit of a starting point where we couldn't find that type of information. But as well, what we found is that through this analysis on the survey and the research, the relative importance of a skilled workforce is a bit different across these different industries. It was particularly important for battery manufacturing. It's quite a complex process, and also for wind manufacturing, particularly for certain aspects of that, nacelles, etc. But it was a bit less important when it comes, for example, for some material production, where there was more cross-cutting kind of skills that could be required. So that's also something important to consider. But of course, here I think understanding that is very important to anticipate, as I've mentioned, this type of plans, how these skills can be developed. Joint venture projects are very useful, but they tend to be small scale. We really need to involve here the relevant authorities within governments really to plan ahead for this kind of educational program related to this type of skills, and make sure that this is part of their development plans. But one of the conclusions we reach in the report as well is that there's a major need to kind of adapt the data collection, how we can monitor the creation of those jobs, but also the skills that will be required. And I think there's an important work to be done there in terms of improving the data availability as well.
So if many of you, like I, have long plane rides home, download those reports so you can see more about what's there. Rebecca, your members at the Global Wind Energy Council include turbine manufacturers, suppliers, and other wind industry stakeholders all around the world. What do you hear from your members as to the biggest risk factors when considering manufacturing investments in emerging markets and developing economies? And then also, what are the opportunities that they're eyeing in those regions?
Hello. Thanks for the question. I just want to offer two congratulations also, first of all. So congratulations to the IEA on what is a fantastic report, an absolute treasure trove of information, really that delving into that in more detail.
You can't hold it down here. There. Yeah, as long as it's not on the translation.
Okay. Is that better? Yeah. It's a treasure trove of information, and absolutely congratulations. And then secondly, of note, this is the only all-female panel I have been on at COP, so congratulations also for that. Really, really great to see. Getting into it, I think I'm here on behalf of the wind sector, but also on behalf of the Global Renewables Alliance. We represent all the different technologies when it comes to renewables in a multilateral conversation. So I'm bringing those perspectives to this discussion. When you look globally, and we actually have done ourselves some quite detailed and complex reports on looking at supply chain availability globally, what is very clear is that to meet the tripling goal of renewables, we are going to need a highly globalized supply chain, which does take into account ability to trade in a free and open way. When we come to wind specifically, we've actually mapped out supply chain availability across the different regions of the world. And we found that by 2026 for offshore wind, around the same time for onshore wind, that we will reach supply chain bottlenecks in pretty much every region of the world, apart from China. We also know that the assembly of a wind turbine in itself, the component parts, it's highly globalized. The content is made up of parts from many different countries. So there's no such thing as, a highly localized wind turbine. It just doesn't exist. So that's the first thing that we need to bear in mind. I think secondly then, looking at the trade aspect, but then also looking at the localization and industrialization aspect, there are huge opportunities for emerging markets around the world. As I just said, we're going to see a shortfall unless we have the ability to trade globally on these issues. And we're really excited to be working with countries like Brazil on their industrialization agenda when it comes to wind, to really grow capability and to be able to feed into that global supply chain. I think when it comes to the wider industrialization piece, what's clear is that we need to address this also by looking at demand growth. So not just looking at building wind turbines or putting in place solar panels, but looking at the whole value chain and taking a systemic point of view when it comes to this matter, to really be able to identify the opportunities and gaps. And we're doing that in quite some detail at GWEC. Would be very pleased to talk to others in the room who are working on this issue. But it's clear to us that there are industrialization opportunities, but we do need to balance that with this needs to have global trade. I hope you understood all of that. I think my microphone was cutting in and out slightly. Thank you.
I think I think we heard you really well. I think, well, just going to do a follow-up for you. And first of all, I have to say yes on the female. So we used to talk about manels, that we had to avoid manels, but now we can have a different target of achieving females.
Wummels or some wummels.
Yeah. Well, there has been decent progress in recent years. It's fair to say that the project pipeline for wind has been a lot more challenging. And you said 2026. So like that's 2 years from now. What's the main reason? We're on the other hand on solar, we see a full supply chain or a capacity, although very clearly dominated with one supplier.
Yeah, well, when we look globally, I mean, let's put this into a bit of context, because we're having the second best year ever that we've ever had for wind growth. So the growth trajectory is there. But what we're seeing now, I think, is interplay between some of these factors that we talk about all the time, non-financial barriers, financial barriers. So in emerging markets, which is the scope of this conversation, we absolutely need to be able to get that financing piece right. And when we're talking about financing, we're not talking about necessarily the kind of high-level conversation, but more how can we apply this to project financing, and how can we get the right capital stack to see that investment flow through on the ground. And then it's down to the kind of non-financial barriers. So permitting, when it comes to supply chain, has a hugely outsized effect on wind. We had a presentation yesterday from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and in that presentation they were saying that the average permitting time in the UK, which is a mature market for wind, is something like 5 to 7 years for an onshore wind turbine or onshore wind project. So the bottom line of that is that the longer your project is stuck in permitting, the harder it is to make those investment flows. That means supply chain find it very difficult to have clarity and visibility on when they're going to be able to realize their investment. So I think we're starting to see some of these factors come to bear on wind, to be honest. But actually, these are very solvable challenges. These are challenges that are within our gift here to solve. And I think that's why I'm very optimistic that actually we will start to see wind growth recover very quickly. But we do need to now put in place the right frameworks to get that sorted. And maybe if I may just have one final word on the kind of globalized supply chain issue. I think we've already heard from panelists here about the importance of emerging markets being able to play their role in this transition, and not just having the same old extractives model. We're here as the industry, as a bunch of different investors, really wanting to make this work, wanting to make those financial flows work, and to be able to invest in emerging markets. But we do need the right structures for us to be able to do that. I'm very happy to work with the governments who are on this panel in order to make that a reality.
Fantastic. Luz Maria, at UN Trade and Development, you're responsible for leading initiatives to promote development of developing countries through trade. And your team works directly with these countries to support them in trade negotiations, strengthen capacities, and integrate trade with environmental and developmental goals. The work that we saw today from the IEA underscores the essential role of trade in clean technology supply chains. For you, what are the indicators of a well-functioning system? Do you see trends such as tariffs or regulations that concern you at the moment?
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for inviting me and UN Trade and Development to be in this panel. Thank you, Araceli, and the Agency of International Energy for this extraordinary report, which I think is going to be extremely useful for all of us. As we have seen during these days in which we've been here, we heard from our Secretary General, Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, that trade is a force for sustainability. Trade has to be part of the policy mix towards climate action and towards addressing the challenges of carbon emissions and climate change. So when we are thinking about trade, for example, these days we have seen the launching on November 14 of the Baku Initiative for investment, trade, and financing for climate, big fit. No? So this Baku Initiative known as an acronym BICFIT, Baku Initiative on Climate, Finance, Investment and Trade, is meant to raise the relevance of these three areas, investment, trade, and finance, to be able to transition to zero emissions and to sustainability. Now, going to trade, I think that the most important thing that trade can do for the world and for developing countries is that we have clear rules. Trade and the international trading system is about offering rules that set the scenario with transparency, predictability, certainty for countries to know exactly what kind of environment they will be facing when they do their business. As was already mentioned, these projects require time. So it's not possible that you start with a project that has one set of rules and then 3 years, 5 years, 7 years later you have something different, or that you don't know what you're going to be facing, because that is exactly what business doesn't need, be it international business, domestic business. We need clear rules. And that is one of the major values of the international trading system, and that is one of the areas in which trade can work. Now, today what we are seeing is a transition, I would say, from trade rules that apply to goods to trade rules that are conditioning market access based on how you produced a good. What do I mean by this? If you want to have access to a certain market, you will need to show that you have produced something with clean energy, or that you have produced with taking care of the environment, of your natural resources, all those things that, of course, they may be legitimate goals. However, they are unilateral. And when you start facing unilateral measures to address market access, we are getting ourselves into a trap, and we may be getting ourselves into a race down to the bottom, or we may be closing the opportunities of those that most need trade in order to have an economic opportunity to develop, to have the resources to go to this transition to sustainability. On the other hand, we also have a set of rules that are coming from the industrial side, industrial subsidies, industrial policies, that are using trade instruments to accomplish a domestic industrial objective. We are not against industrial policy. What we are against, or what we are worried about, is that these industrial policies start using trade instruments like export controls, tariffs, non-tariff measures, standards, regulations, to create new market access barriers. And the problem, I think, in what we see, the underlying problem, is that we no longer know what we are facing. We no longer know what is the real opportunity that trade can bring to developing countries. My third point is that we have been hearing a lot about sustainable chains, value chains that are global, no? So if they're global, we also need global rules that ensure that developing countries and emerging markets have the capacity to participate. We are worried that we may end up again in the same kind of model where developing countries, as was shown in the presentation that Araceli made, we have a lot of developing countries have a lot of these natural resources that are needed for the energy transition, in terms of mines, for example, in terms of different kinds of minerals. But we want to make sure that we don't come up with the same extractive model where the developing countries export all of the raw materials and then they're processed somewhere else. There needs to be some way in which we can make sure that developing countries also benefit from this transition to a new industry. How do we make that? Well, trade policy can be part of the solution. Trade is not the only instrument that can be used, but trade needs to be part of the policy mix towards the national determined contributions that all countries will be presenting, that we'll see next year in 2025. We think that trade needs to be part of that policy mix. Trade can be part of the solution. At UNCTAD, we mapped 60 NDCs from developing countries, and we identified only 15 of those NDCs from 50 developing countries had some component of trade policy and trade ministers involved. So there's huge space and huge potential for trade to help in this transition. Thank you.
That's really interesting. I think about how NDCs are developed. When we're developing our domestic climate policies, I think we do think about it as an interdepartmental ecosystem, and thinking about industrial policy, we think about trade, and bringing that into the NDC is a really, really interesting topic. And I also take your point about the frictions we're creating between countries, and that that might counter some of both the prosperity and clean transition goals that we're all trying to achieve. So what are the right settings for trade policies to ensure the best chances of maximum participation for EMDs and clean technology supply chains?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. We believe that global problems need global solutions. So global solutions need to take into account not only, in this case, environmental or sustainability perspectives. We need to include the productive sector. We need to include investors. We need to include trade policy makers. Why? Because they need to have a conversation. They need to have a dialogue. Why do we say this? For example, tariffs today. We know that tariffs applied to clean energy technology or clean energy products are twice as high as those for fuels, carbon fuels. So there's a disconnect there. Their trade policy makers are not talking to the environmental people or vice versa. There needs to be consistency, there needs to be coherence. The same case with regulations. As you know, tariffs are an important barrier, but sometimes regulations are a more important barrier, NTMs, non-tariff measures. Why? Because they set the standard of rules, norms, regulations that a product or a service need to offer in order to have market access. So if you have no tariffs, but you have standards that are extremely demanding or are extremely difficult to comply with, or the compliance cost is extremely high, then you are fragmenting a market that should not be fragmented, that needs to be globalized. And one last addition to what needs to be done. Well, I think that one of the things that needs to be done is that we understand that today competitiveness is not exclusively about cost reduction. Competitiveness is about making sure that value chains can comply with sustainability goals, and how those sustainability goals really make the best use of our resources from the very beginning of the value chain till from upstream to downstream. Right? Thank you.
Thanks, that's really helpful. I want to hear a little bit more about the idea that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and each country, each region, each community can have a difference. And so I'd be interested to hear from Mariana about policies and measures your government is pursuing that you think could be an inspiration to others.
Yeah, this is really important for us, especially because we are a continental country, and we have many different perspectives from one place to other in Brazil, and this diversity is quite important for us. So we see, for example, part of our trajectory on energy transition relies pretty much on the development of bioeconomy, for example, which is part of our is an important part of our energy matrix nowadays. But as we move towards these new prospects, for example, this might be quite interesting, for example, for attracting new opportunities for fertilizers industries, for example, where they see that we have a huge demand for fertilizers in Brazil, but we still rely on the business as usual models and many other things. So, for example, we are seeing many entrepreneurs interested on developing hydrogen projects in Brazil that are looking and aiming at this as a possibility for having green ammonia being produced in our country, because we have already, as I was mentioning, 93% of our national grid composed by renewables. So it's quite a dropping opportunity for many investors. And they can rely on a very sustainable solution, and also reducing the emissions from the agriculture sector, which is something that is very predominant in our economical basis. But moving a little bit to the other side and thinking a little bit more on the mineral resources, which are quite an important thing also for Brazil. We have seen on the IEA presentation that we have a lot of copper production, we have a lot of iron as well, and we can contribute even more, but not only by providing the raw material. We are discussing internally how can we open up this as an opportunity for attracting investments and companies interested on adding value in Brazil, so that we can have these as an opportunity, for example, for diversifying the value chains for some important materials. Right now, we are taking into consideration these two batteries, for example, because we have lithium, we have also nickel reserves, and we are in close interaction with some technological centers and many other research institutions that we have in Brazil, so that we can have more efficient batteries to reduce the dependence or the need for mining in guaranteeing that they are more, they can last more. So we see this connection to innovation as a key part of this aspect. And even in developing countries, this is already taking place. And I think Brazil can, for sure, contribute to this debate into other developing economies as well, to showcase that it is possible to do. It is necessary to have the right instruments in the right place, so that we can guarantee that the investments will be there. Some public incentives might be needed, and this is something that we are also considering. And to have the national regulations really working for it to happen. We are right now discussing, as we have said, this new Brazilian industry policy. We are now discussing about the launch of the mining for clean energy. I think this is the name of the program in English, in the free translation here. But what do we want to do in this case? We want to guarantee that entrepreneurs that are interested on developing these new value chains for this new raw material, and also beneficiating them and processing them in Brazil, they can access different levels of incentives and subsidies, so that we can guarantee that they are going to be developed in our country in a sustainable way. This is really important to say, and in a responsible way. So we are designing a special labeling systems where those industries, they are going to be recognized by having those standards accomplished across the time. We have already some nice experiences in Brazil, and we are right now attracting some industries, for example, for electric vehicles in Brazil, that are already looking at this whole value chain production, such as the aluminium, the bauxite, as we have already in Brazil, which is also needed for EVs. They are already produced with low renewable technologies, and it's really a must for many of these industries. So we are going through trying to balance these two aspects by allocating the incentives, which is from the public policy mandates. We are coupling with innovation and research and development, which is a crucial aspect that should be also addressed. And we are also bringing regulations in terms of designing and setting what is the country standards and the required standards that we understand that are going to be needed. And a fourth point that is crucial is to have financing institutions with us. And we are right now with the National Development Bank also looking at these projects, also to guarantee that entrepreneurs that are interested on developing these projects in Brazil, they can find low interest rates, and so that they can also develop their projects by guaranteeing that this is going to be also a way of developing them.
So I think that built on the idea of competitiveness being more than about cost. So I think that was really important and a really good evolution. From the IEA perspective, what would you say to countries that are grappling with that challenge of boosting competitiveness?
Right, thanks very much, Rachel. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the aspects that became as well quite clear in this analysis on supply chains we've been doing over the last years is that not all countries can, in a way, be competitive, and have strengths in all supply chains and in all steps within a supply chain. And so I think for countries like emerging markets, developing economies, where economic resources could be even more limited, then it becomes even more important to think about, where are the priorities and to have a clear strategy to tackle those priorities. We've seen as well, and I mean, we've discussed in the presentation, and I think as well now, we've identified some of the best kind of opportunities in some of these regions when it comes to, looking at very low production cost potential, particularly in the long term. And so I think moving forward, if we really manage to develop capacities in those countries, could be really a beneficial strategy to lower the cost of the transition as well overall. And this could, develop into a quite interesting opportunity to diversify those supply chains in a way that, again, will have competitive costs, and at the same time, it could really, constitute the global energy security, of the future. Of course, here it's important that these projects, these partnerships are developed in a win-win fashion, as I think the minister put it very well this morning. We have to keep in mind both sides. So when we think about, from the perspective of emerging markets, developing economies is an opportunity, of course, to develop capacities in their country, to develop socioeconomic prosperity. From the perspective of wealthier countries that could, support as well with financing, could be more the means really to diversify those supply chains. And again, it could be important that, that those strategic partnerships are developing that kind of win-win perspective. We've actually in the report also looked at how to do that, and we've provided at least 6 principles. Of course, this is very much dependent on a case-by-case basis, but 6 principles that could help. And just to keep it short, to mention a couple that I thought were quite interesting. First, is important, of course, that these programs, these projects, keep in mind the development of this national domestic capacity. So to build really this innovation capacity, to build really this knowledge in the countries. And the second one to highlight perhaps is that we need to make sure that those projects and, again, programs, plans are as well compatible with the domestic policy goals in a broader sense of those countries as well. But yeah, I think it's, again, a lot of potential here to develop those projects.
Thanks for that. Rebecca, we're talking about people getting attracted to invest. When you look at industrial strategies in countries, what are your members, what are your partners looking for? And then what do they shudder? What do they say, oh, I can't go there?
Yeah, I'm really super impressed by what I've heard so far on the panel, because I think there's great alignment between what we're saying, and I was struck around the comments around competitiveness as well, and the need to ensure that competitiveness is maintained, and the role of tariffs or non-tariffs in disrupting also that competitiveness, or in creating an area or a region which in itself then becomes less competitive as a result of those tariffs. So that's something I just wanted to kind of put a pin in, because that's really interesting. When we're looking at what investors want, I think this starts from the kind of top level. So do you have a target which is then translated into concrete steps around volume? Because for the investors that I represent, really what they need to see, as I mentioned before, is this way of realizing their investment. So they want to know, okay, if you've got an auction framework, are you going to do that every year? How many gigawatts are you going to procure every year? They want a concrete plan which sets this out so that they can be more confident when they're in front of their investment committees and boards, explaining how many years it's going to take to realize this investment. And then there's a big bucket of things around kind of general business environment, confidence in the ability to do business in that country, which are absolutely crucial. I think just expanding on the topic of industrialization a little bit further as well, I think it's really important that countries, as we were hearing, really consider where their strengths and weaknesses lie in that industrial piece. And from an investor perspective, I think countries that can, have a look at that in a quite detailed way regarding mapping how they see this, where their own inherent industrial strengths lie, and set that out in easy to understand documents. That stuff is also gold dust when it comes to attracting that investment. So volume and that roadmap is super important, but it's not just about that. There's also this kind of more subjective bucket of things around kind of comfort of investors, around return on investment, and around risk, which need to be addressed as well.
I feel like we have a lot of conversations right now about creating the new supply, but having the new demand at the same time. So you're creating both sides at the same time, which is really important. Just digging quickly right into the tariffs issue, Luz Maria, we see that tariffs on clean tech are actually higher than on fossils, especially in developing countries. What can we do about this? And are there any instances that you think it's justified?
Well, thank you for your question, Rachel. Tariffs basically are a tax to consumers. The consumer may be the final consumer, or the consumer may be the producer that needs an input for integrating it into the value chain. I think that, tariffs at the end of the day are a national decision. And that national decision has to depend on what do you want to accomplish with that tariff. And I think that we need to understand very well that some tariffs are meant to protect industries at some point in which they are nascent industries. Some other tariffs are imposed because it's a way to raise revenue for governments. And the question is, how do they spend that revenue? And if those, sometimes we see tariffs that are intended to address some specific issue. In this case, I don't know if they are meant to address climate challenges, no? So at the end of the day, tariffs may end up supporting the development of an industry. However, we also need to take into account that tariffs are just one piece of the policy mix. We have seen that on one hand, even if you have a low tariff or you have no tariff, if you don't have the right regulation, if you don't have the right standard, if you have standards that are extremely high in terms of cost, or they're not simply adaptable to your country, then even if you have a zero tariff, you will not be able to go into the supply chain. The second thing about tariffs that we're seeing is that today, unfortunately, we are seeing a backlash against trade. We're seeing the scrutiny of trade liberalization and globalization for many different reasons that we're not going to discuss here, because then we would have another panel. Nonetheless, we are seeing a temptation of different countries to start imposing tariffs as a way of protecting their own industry, because they consider that that may be the best way to move forward in terms of developing a sector that is new to the country or that requires special kinds of investment and subsidies. This is something that, of course, each country will need to assess whether that is the way to go or not. But for us, what is really important to take into consideration is that we cannot forget that trade, and especially towards going to sustainability, developing clean technologies, the transition to the clean energy sector requires from the participation of many different countries, as has already been said, from the very basic raw material to the high-tech technology. It's a global industry. And to the extent that you start imposing unilateral tariffs, you may create distortions and you may end up, for example, from the developing perspective, you may create costs that are so high to comply with that it may end up undermining the ultimate goal, which is how do we reduce carbon emissions and how can we really allow that we have an inclusive transition to a clean, sustainable energy matrix. And my last point is that today, unfortunately, WTO is trying to move forward in terms of negotiations of an environmental goods negotiation, a plurilateral negotiation. It has 47 countries out of 166 members. But so far, it has not been able to accomplish the reduction or the tariff liberalization of those products. I think that we need to keep focus. We need to understand that tariffs are only one instrument that can be used at some point to adapt the transition to technology, but they cannot be the ultimate instrument or the ultimate goal, which is to impose restrictions on an industry that requires so much support. Thank you.
Yes, and I expect we're going to be having lots of conversations in the next few years on tariffs and on the goods and services liberalization at the WTO. It's been very ongoing, and I think it's a really important thing that we try and dig in on and try to get progress on. And what I see is actually a lot of bilateral, unilateral, regional efforts that are probably going to make that plurilateral and global effort a little bit harder over time if they're not all talking to each other. So closing remarks, Mariana, if you were going to say one thing to your international partners or two things to your international partners in terms of supply chains and how to work with Brazil, or what would you say?
First of all, that we are keen to cooperate, and actually we have a lot to offer, but we have a lot to learn. So having those mechanisms in terms of bilateral, multilateral cooperation is really necessary for us, as we are dealing with many new aspects that we by having these shared knowledge might be really useful for us to reduce this learning curve for us. And I think one of the key aspects that we are considering right now is that this is an important part of capacity building that we should not overlook. We need to have our institutions ready. We need to have our financial institutions already capable of understanding the size of the challenge that we have ahead of us. And Brazil has been establishing many strategic bilateral cooperations, already looking for those possible partnerships to move forward. And I think it is important also to highlight that a couple of days ago we have presented our new NDC. And in this new NDC we have set and we have brought, as Luis Maria was saying, we have included industry, trade, investments, and as part of our NDC strategy and how we want to contribute to this energy transition globally. But yeah, there are many uncertainties ahead of us, so we are really keen to enhance this sort of cooperation so that we can advance.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to thank all of the panelists. It was a really interesting conversation with lots of concrete ideas and opportunities highlighted. So I'd like to thank all of you for participating. I recommend downloading the report for your plane ride home. Take a look at it and then share it and continue the conversation after you leave here, because this is such an important topic and is really key to us all achieving our shared goals. Thank you.
Thank you.